United States, a very popular assessment is what they call oral reading fluency, ORF, in which students read a text for 1 minute and count the number of words read correctly and compare it against norms.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the same here. Normal words and non-words, both of them.
Okay. But words in text, not in isolation.
Isolation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, what I'm describing is actually students reading a passage that is at their grade level.
Yeah.
So it's not just words in isolation. They're reading what we'd call connected discourse, an actual text for 1 minute. Yeah, and then we have norms that we compare it against. Now, very well. The problem is what we have found is that number one, it's highly predictive of overall reading achievement. Yeah. And number two, we find that a number of our students, say around grades 3 and 4, so that'd be our 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds, do not perform well. They are pretty good. They are good at decoding words, but they do it at an excessively slow pace, which is an indication that they're not automatically recognizing the words. And so what happens is their cognitive resources are being applied to decoding words and not to paying attention to the meaning of the text. Exactly. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. Yes. Does that describe many of your students? Yeah. Yeah. So what we do is work on fluency. Leif, you mentioned the reading progress. That's where students read something and it's artificially read back to them. So, and that's a great way of developing fluency. Repeated readings, where you ask students to read. We use a lot of poetry, where students read a text 2, 3, 4 times until they can read it well, and then they actually perform it. We actually call repeated readings rehearsal, because the aim is not just to read it fast, but to read it at a level that can be performed for an audience. But anyways, what we have found is when they do that, repeated readings 3 or 4 times of a text, when they move on to a new passage, there's growth there. You see improvement in their reading. So in a sense, what these students are doing is they're bootstrapping themselves up to higher and higher levels of reading proficiency. And as I mentioned before, that speed of reading seems to be a good correlated pretty highly with overall reading achievement. So we work on fluency a lot, and we've actually here in the United States, I think, Leif, you mentioned how phonics has been identified as the medicines that's going to cure everything, but it doesn't. No. We have kids who can decode the words, but as I said, they're not very fluent readers. And we're beginning to recognize we need to work on that with students also, especially around that 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade where, phonics is done with, and now we need to work on fluency. Yeah.
And we tried that with our 4th grader, this progress program, to work with them. And it's another tool for us to use in another way. So that in itself is interesting and motivating for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
To do. And
when you say you use it, are you talking about reading progress or repeated readings?
Or repeating progress.
Okay.
Yeah. But they repeat it. They get a text and they repeat that text.
Okay. Right.
So they can follow, and they themselves can follow how many words they miss, or if how long it takes, and the accuracy of the reading.
Right. We also use a rubric where teachers listen to children read and they rate them on a rubric. And I'm wondering if that might be something of value. So it's broken down into the 4 areas: expression and volume, phrasing. Fluent readers tend to read in chunks of words, where less fluent readers read word by word. Smoothness and pacing. And the idea is simply to listen to kids read and rate them on this. A low score would be a 1, a high score would be a 4. So your total lowest score would be a 4, 1 in each of those categories, and your highest score would be a 16. We find children who score less than 10 is an indication that fluency is a problem on this. So might be something you might want to take a look at. You can easily, you have my permission to translate it into Swedish, and see if teachers there might want to use it.
But does that
it's
correlate with the Legilexi levels or?
It's not the same. It's not the same, but this is another way of looking at it, and we are talking about that now. A recent
right,
teacher here about just poetry and rhymes and
right,
kind of fluency. As you said, we normally just check fluency in reading the words, and
right.
you can learn them by heart, and then you think you have it, but it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. Right, right, right. So yeah, that's why we look at having kids read a full text like a poem or a segment of a story. The problem with, longer texts like stories is that if you're going to ask children to repeatedly read it, that it's going to take a long time. That's why I like poetry. It's short.
Mm.
It it just takes a matter of minutes for children to read it once, twice, three times, and they can get to the point where they master it. Then we move on to another poem, and then at the end of the week they select their favorite poem and they perform for their classmates. They have a poetry slam here, a little poetry cafe.
Yeah.
And it, really tends to make it motivating for the kids because they know, they're going to perform for their classmates. And the school principal might show up or parents can come.
Yeah.
So for us, it's what I often call an artful approach to teaching reading fluency, not just practicing for the point of trying to get students to read fast, but to read with good expression, which is another big part of reading fluency. So that's a big tool for us. The reading progress, where
What is your connection to the Microsoft Reading Progress? Because they mention you.
Yeah, I'm not really employed by them. About 2 or 3 years ago, they contacted me. They had created this application, and like you, they became aware of some of my work in the area of reading fluency, and they called me up and said, do you think this has any application for schools? And my answer was, yeah. Anytime students can read something and be, supported by a fluent reading of the same text, that's a great way of developing fluency with students. So they used me as a consultant for about a year, and then we went on our separate ways. I guess they still use my name, but yeah, it's like you said earlier, it's another tool to help develop fluency with our kids.
It's I would say
they read
It sounds like a good study, and I hope when you finish it up, you'll share the results.
Yeah.
Here in the United States now, because of all this emphasis on phonics, our individual states are identifying programs that schools have to use. They're taking that away from teachers and school principals and school boards, and so much of it is being directed by the publishing companies.
Yeah.
They come in, they're talking to our state legislators who basically know nothing, but they wine and dine them and get them to identify these certain programs as mandated. Schools have to use them, and I think we're going to have some disappointing results in about 4 or 5 years.
We
Children
have about the same here because a few years ago they started something called Right to Read. Have you heard of that?
Okay.
No.
Oh, I haven't, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it started somewhere in Norway that young
Okay.
children was not so much into phonics, but they should start writing
Yeah.
on iPads.
Right.
Whatever they wanted.
It's sad because it's behind all this is a distrust of teachers and school leaders.
Exactly.
They don't know, teachers don't know what they're doing, so we have to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And it just it's disappointing, so disappointing.
So they started, and it was about the same that they said this is what you should use.
Yeah, right.
Many of us who's worked for quite some years said this could be a tool by all the others, but it's not the thing.
Right. You know, offer it as a choice,
Yeah, exactly.
but
For some,
not as a,
but not something that you have to do.
yeah,
It was not
right.
not research or anything. It was just a method to use with iPads, and they
Exactly.
thought this is the thing to do it.
Right. Yeah.
And now it's not so in anymore. Now they're talking about phonics, and then it's just the phonics. So, but
Right.
you need all these tools.
Yeah. Now, I'm not familiar with the Swedish language, but is it a transparent language? In other words, the letters are pretty good representations of the sounds.
It's very,
Okay. Okay. So phonics should be pretty easy
yeah, it is
for
easy.
Swedish children.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, as you know, Leaf, English is not so much.
No.
Yeah. So, but how about parents? Um, are parents involved?
And not that much, and not so educated by us either, but they have
Okay.
they read at home and then it comes back.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
read every week like that. That's the
There was a
It's,
program that was developed several years ago by a psychologist in Scotland. His name is Keith Topping. I can send you the paper that he wrote. But he developed this program. He called it paired reading.
Yeah.
And the idea was for parents to sit side by side with their children and read together for 10 minutes. And they read the same passage, the same text. It wasn't, parents, and it wasn't the parents would read a line and the child would read a line. They read together simultaneously for 10 minutes a night.
Mm.
And what he found was that the children improved remarkably, not only in terms of fluency, but their comprehension as well. And what I liked about it, it doesn't take a lot of time, 10 minutes per night. Most parents, even if they're not, highly educated, they have enough reading ability to read children's material with their own children. Might be something you might want to consider also.
So one of the objectives is to get teams on the phones of all the students and encourage them so they can do reading progress at home. But if that could be combined with what you say, that would
But if I understand you correctly, so it's better to train fluency in a text, not only words like that.
Yes.
Not word lists. More text.
Yeah.
Poems, rhymes, songs.
We usually look for a passage, 100 to 200 words. And the goal is for students to get to the point where they can read it well. So for some children, they can read it twice. For other children, it might be 4 or 5 readings before they can get that. But because it's not terribly long, they're not going to get overly frustrated with the shorter text like that.
You actually had in one of your articles, you said you could have repeated reading, but change about 20% of the world, and you could that using chat. So I tried that actually. So I took one of the text for reading.
Okay.
And asked Bing Copilot to change 20% of the words, and it looked quite cool.
Well, you know what happens when the children do the repeated readings, one of the fears is the kids, they simply memorize the text and they're not looking at the words anymore, right? We've all memorized a poem. So when you can do that, when you can change 20% of the words, now they're forced back into looking at the words, right? Which you have to do to read. You can't just simply memorize a text.
Yeah.
We've seen some of our kids sometimes with a poem, they have it memorized and they're standing in front of their classmates to read it, but they're looking up the ceiling because they know it by heart. And you guys say, well, that's not really reading. You have to look at the words for it to be reading there. So that's a good idea, Leaf, to get to change the words, some of them anyways. And in fact, one of the things we do with poetry is we write parodies, poems that have the same rhythm, but like you said, some of the words have changed.
Aldrig har jag sett så många människor, aldrig hört så många skratt. Förtjusta tjut. Sol i mina ögon, bara armar. Läsk och godis utan slut. Och mitt hjärta ett öppet